This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Carol Masser in New York.
And I'm Kevin Cirilli in Washington, D.C. Now let's bring in our political panel. Here with us in Washington is Republican strategist Eric Wilson, and from San Francisco, political analyst and Democratic activist Lincoln Mitchell. I'll start with you. These developments with regards to the emails and Ukraine, and it was 90 minutes after that phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. Is that going to change the dynamics at all in the Senate?
I don't think so. I think, the debate over whether the articles are going to go over, who has to send them, it's a lot of distinction without a difference, I think, especially to the American people, because Nancy Pelosi already made her Democrats walk the plank and vote for impeachment, especially those Democrats in those districts that President Trump won.
So Lincoln,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin. No, Carol, the floor is yours.
Well, I bet we have the same question. I am curious, though, Lincoln, about, what Kevin just asked. Does any of this change in terms of the Ukraine timing here and the conversation that the president had with the Ukrainian president? Does any of this change in terms of your thinking about the impeachment proceedings?
No. I mean, the Republicans in the Senate have made it clear that they're going to acquit the president. So another piece of evidence isn't going to change that. Marginally, we've seen in the data that impeachment seems like, it's not clear how this is moving the American people. It's helping the Democrats maybe a tiny, tiny bit. This might help them a tiny, tiny bit more, but I don't see this as any kind of game-changing news or new information in that regard.
What do you make, Lincoln, though, about Nancy Pelosi and her delays? And I think there's been a lot of focus on that and what it means, and some are criticizing her. How do you see it? What's her play here?
Well, her play here, I think, is to give Chuck Schumer a little bit more time to try to get 4 Republicans to agree to the radical notion of calling witnesses and being able to call witnesses and have a real trial. And if she's unable to do that, she'll pass it on to the Senate, and they'll have the trial in the time, more or less that they'd always wanted. So I don't see this as a big deal. Underestimating Nancy Pelosi is something people do at their own peril. I mean, there was a lot of Republicans who thought she wasn't going to get the votes on this. She wouldn't have begun this impeachment process if she didn't have the vote. So I don't think this is going to end up being a huge deal.
Lincoln, I think it continues to be a problem for Democrats because we've seen a party switch in New Jersey with Jeff Van Drew. Pennsylvania 8 was moved from lean D to toss up. And we just heard about Doug Jones, senator from Alabama, who's really struggling with this. So I think it's the Democrats who are in a tough position on impeachment right now.
You're right. I was really struck. Doug Jones took the absolutely radical and very right-wing position that he was going to maybe see some evidence first, right? So the fact that a U.S. senator says, I want to see some evidence, is now seen as big news. And I think that tells you a little bit about where we stand. As far as Pennsylvania 8, note that the most likely outcome here, and I think everyone agrees with this, is by the time of the Iowa caucus, say, Trump has been acquitted and the trial is over. The November election is 10 months away. By then, I don't know what the economy will be. I don't know even who the nominee will be on the Democratic side, but I'm pretty sure we won't be talking about impeachment anymore. So,
well, that's what I want to pick up on. Go ahead.
No, so there's 10 months to go, and when the Republican Senate acquits, which they will, one thing we have to keep in mind is that is essentially not just a get-out-of-jail-free card to Trump, but it's a kind of encouragement to continue to push the boundaries, continue to break the law. And the voters don't like that. That's why more than 50% right now are supporting removal and acquittal. That's why Trump has never really gotten out of the mid-40s in the polls.
Well, let's dive down into those battleground states, Michigan, Ohio. You mentioned Pennsylvania. In terms of switching gears now to the 2020 election, how are the top-tier candidates, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, I think has been incredibly consistent in terms of his poll numbers, perhaps much underestimated by some of the rival campaigns. How is that going to play out in this horse race now as we enter that in January, Lincoln?
Well, I certainly would agree. Bernie is nothing if not consistent. But right now what we're seeing is in all those battleground states, Trump is stuck in kind of the 42 to 45% window in terms of the head-to-head. And the difference is the better-known Democrats, the Bidens, sometimes the Sanderses, are doing, are about 47, 48, some are at 44, 46. What that tells us is what we already know. This is going to be very close in those states. One issue that has been largely overlooked is the issue of age replacement. As older voters, essentially die, some of them, and younger voters come into the electorate, that helps the Democrat. The Michigan electorate, the Wisconsin electorate, the Pennsylvania electorate, right now, is a more favorable electorate for the Democratic nominee, whoever that is, than it was in 2016. So Trump's challenge is to bring in, it's not the Democrats who have to win over new voters, ironically. It's Trump who does in these states because of this age replacement
Let's bring
issue.
in Eric on that. So, Eric, how do you see, where is the Trump administration? How can they go after those the younger voter base?
Well, I think they're doing a great job reaching out to the younger voters online. I think these voters, in particular, people who are my age, are paying attention to impeachment and understand that the case against the president is pretty weak. And they hear these people like Senator Doug Jones who's saying, I don't see the evidence here.
Yeah, but in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, no one's voting on impeachment. Wait. I feel like I'm at the Christmas table at my family. But serious, no one's voting on impeachment in these battleground states. They're voting on trade. They're voting on the economy, health care if you're a Democrat.
And that's why it's really dangerous for Democrats right now, because they're not talking about their candidates who are working their tails off in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. And
if the general election were February 5th, you'd be right. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. But what I'm saying is there's going to be a lot of time between the acquittal and the election. And what this is going to come down to is, if the economy remains strong, Trump will run on that. And the Democrats will run on all of the other criticisms of Trump, and that's what this election is going to come down to.
Well, let's be smart. That's exactly what it's going to come down to, is the economy and how people feel in November. I think there's some concerns, but I think it's safe to say that there's a base out there that are looking for someone who understands the economy, can filter it through, but does not like the president.
We have two contradictory
impeachment,
data
though,
points.
is baked in, Carol, because the Democrats used impeachment to get majority in the House in 2018. Your opinion about Donald Trump has not changed in this entire endeavor. And so I think we're going to be looking at other issues on Election Day. It's not going to be about impeachment. I think another really important asset for Republicans is that supporters of the president now understand just how critical it is for him to have majorities in the Senate and the House. And so I think impeachment ends up being a net benefit to Republicans rather than Democrats.
I mean, right now it seems to be a net benefit to Democrats. It certainly was in 2018, when I think you're right, it didn't get a lot of publicity. I think it did run largely on impeachment, and they really did quite well. When we get to the general election, the Democrats are going to run on health care, they're going to run on guns, and they're going to run on climate change. And those are all issues that help the Democrats. Right now, we have two data points. One is a strong economy. It's pretty clear to me that an ordinary Republican, someone like, let's just pick a name, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, somebody like that, would be walking to re-election pretty easily right now. But we also have this other data point. Trump's poll numbers are so low, and a Republican with those numbers would lose.
We could continue for another 60 minutes. Got to leave it there, gentlemen. Eric Wilson and Lincoln Mitchell, thank you so much. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.